please welcome Senator Deb Fischer from Nebraska.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Kyle. That was a very wonderful introduction, and I really want to thank Kyle for his service to our transportation systems nationally, but especially in Nebraska. He has been a great addition to our state. I am very grateful to be with you here today. I understand, though, that the Vice President was your first choice to give this address, but I am deeply honored to stand in for him. Kind of at first, I thought I was going to be playing second fiddle to the Vice President, but then I Googled second fiddle, and it was actually his office that came up as the first result. So if Mike Pence is second fiddle, I have no idea what that even makes me at this point. But in all sincerity, I do thank you for this very kind invitation. As many of you know, my father was a longtime member of AASHTO, and so I am excited to be able to give an address to a community that he loved so much. I brought with me today 2 items from his time in the association when my mom's 93 and still lives in the home where I grew up in Lincoln, and so many times when I'm back in the state, I stay with my mom. And when I was there a couple weeks ago, I said, "Where do you keep all the AASHTO stuff?" And they had boxes of it, but because they came to every convention. But I brought with me a couple items today, and I would like to donate them to your historical collection. One is my dad's 1949 edition of the American Association of State Highway Officials Standard Specifications for Highway Bridges. He wrote his name on the inside cover here. So he's got his name here. And I think if anybody doubted his love for his profession or for this organization, all you have to do is read some of his notes that are written in the margins here. And as engineers, you will all identify with that. I have no idea what they mean. But you guys are very thorough, so you all take notes, I know. The second one is an Alcoa dish from the Pittsburgh Convention, November 10th through the 13th, 1953. And I think this might have been the first convention that he and Mom attended. He was the newly minted Nebraska bridge engineer at the time, and it was quite a distinction for him. I think he'd been with the department, he joined in 47, so in 52 he became bridge engineer when he was 31 years old. So I'd like to give you that. Now, Kyle wanted me to mention that he missed the 1953 meeting. He told me he was stuck in traffic. But needless to say, this organization is near and dear to my heart, and also to the hearts of millions of Americans across this country. For as much as the tools of your trade are cables and concrete and asphalt and access, the whole system exists really to serve people and their families. And I know from my dad the devotion and the dedication that you all bring to your work. And I stand in admiration of that, and I thank you for it. And I seek now to be an excellent steward of that in the United States Senate. There is an old story that's popular in Nebraska, and I'm sure you hear it all across this country in transportation circles. It was told by a man named Lewis Hurst, who served 40 years as superintendent at the Lincoln Supply Base. It goes like this. Years ago, a man and a woman and 3 little children came to Lincoln in an old wooden wagon, and it was pulled by 2 plow horses. The man drove the rig to a local church. He stopped, and he took his family in. They were greeted by the rector, who asked, "Well, how can I help you?" And the man said, "We'd like to get married." And the rector, he looked at him over his spectacles, and he said, "Aren't you a little late, my son?" And the man said, "Yes, Father, we are a little late, but the roads have been pretty bad." It's a simple story, but we hear that often, I think, over the years. And in many cases, it does carry a certain truth with it. The primary role of the road in our American experience is one thing. The automobile and the highway, they're integral to our culture and to our identity as a nation. And it's more so for Americans, I think, than any other people. This story shows the significance of a transportation network where we connect human beings to each other. Whether it's a family traveling together, going to church, they could be going to market, they could be hauling cattle, they could be taking eggs to market, they could be doing any number of things. But the story, I think, lastly reveals the problems that we face with our surface transportation system. And in this case, it's delays due to poor infrastructure. We see that can punch way above its pay grade. These problems affect almost every aspect of our everyday life. No matter who we are, where we live, what our income is, or any other distinction that can be made. In the Senate, much of my work has been focused on removing unnecessary obstacles to that flow of goods, to that flow of materials, and most importantly, people who are living and working along our transportation networks. Through legislation, and now hopefully with better executive orders, I think we can lower the coefficient of friction on these systems enough that people and products can get to where they need to go quicker and that they can do so with less cost. In the Senate, I have been very proud to introduce several pieces of legislation that will do just that. As everyone knows, in 2015, we passed the FAST Act. That was our first long-term highway bill in over a decade. As chairman of the Surface Transportation Subcommittee on the Commerce Committee, I was very, very pleased to help steer that to passage. I was very pleased to be chosen as a third-year senator, to serve on that conference committee. And I'm also very proud that I've been able to author significant portions of that legislation. For example, the FAST Act includes the categorical exclusion programmatic agreement template. And this provision establishes procedures based on a template that is developed by the Transportation Secretary. It allows states and the federal government to determine which states or federal agencies must be consulted before beginning an infrastructure project. Among many other provisions, this will help states navigate that federal bureaucracy that's out there and be able to move forward with our critical transportation projects. The bill also includes a new National Strategic Freight Program. And this National Freight Program will provide all states with funding for a wide array of multimodal transportation projects. The freight program also includes dedicated funding for rural and urban freight corridors, which is really going to enhance the flow of commercial traffic, and I believe it will increase safety on our nation's roads for all of our travelers. The FAST Act shows that Congress can really enact common sense, bipartisan legislation that's going to help Americans. I find that encouraging. But there is much, much more work to be done. President Trump has spoken frequently about the need to invest in our transportation infrastructure. I happen to believe that infrastructure is a core duty. It is a core responsibility of a federal government. And I'm conservative. But I believe it is a core duty of a limited federal government. To me, it's not a stimulus, it's an investment. It represents investment in our economy. It represents investment in our public safety. And it certainly represents an investment in our national security. And I am optimistic that this will be a prime focus of the Trump administration. So to capitalize on this moment, I've introduced a bill, the Build USA Infrastructure Act, and I introduced it in the Senate, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. The Build USA Infrastructure Act, I believe it looks to solve two of the major challenges that are facing our transportation system right now. The first is that near-term solvency of the Highway Trust Fund and what's going to happen after the FAST Act expires in 2020. And the second is a lack of flexibility for our states in being able to start and finish major transportation infrastructure projects. According to the March 2016 Congressional Budget Office projections, by the year 2026, the Highway Trust Fund will face a shortfall of approximately $107 billion. And meanwhile, as you all know, construction costs are climbing. We're going to see an increase in usage of electric and alternative fueled vehicles, and I think that will only add to the problems we have with the trust fund. Revenues are going to fall. We face heavy, heavy federal regulations, and that just eats away at the revenues that we do have available to us. It eats away at the purchasing power that those trust fund dollars give us. So America needs a new plan, and they need a new plan so that we can successfully meet those shortfalls that we're facing in funding, but also so we can strengthen our transportation system. And I have the plan for you. So the first 5 years following the expiration of the FAST Act, my legislation would direct the U.S. Treasury to dedicate approximately $21.4 billion in Customs and Border Patrol collected fees and revenues and direct those to the Highway Trust Fund. Now, the CPB revenue collections are on freight, cargo, and passengers, and that includes tariffs, duties, taxes, and user fees at U.S. land, water, and airports of entry. And CBP revenues from these sources amounts to nearly $46 billion in the fiscal year of 2015. Because of their nature as charges on freights and passengers, customs duties, and these fees, I think we can make the nexus here, that this closely abides to the user pays principle that we have always promoted for transportation funding. And according to the CBP, the agency, out of that $46 billion, they only utilize $2 billion of that for operations. So the diversion of this revenue would not negatively impact the CBP's operating budget. By using existing revenue stream, I think we will provide stability to the Highway Trust Fund, and we can do that without increasing fees or taxes. I believe that is sound public policy. The Build USA Infrastructure Act also offers greater flexibility to states so that your limited highway dollars can go further. I served 8 years in the Nebraska legislature, 6 years as chairman of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. So I understand that states face real challenges, and you face these challenges in starting and completing your infrastructure projects. You face them because of delays and procedural costs, and really just the overall lack in transportation funding. According to the Congressional Research Service, major federal highway projects can take as long as 14 years from start to finish. You all know that. We also know that that takes more time than it took to build the Panama Canal. And we did that over a century ago. We have to have greater flexibility. We have to have improved collaboration. And we have to, as states, have more autonomy so that we can begin and complete these vital infrastructure projects in less time, which means lower cost. So the Build USA Infrastructure Act would let you do that through a state remittance agreement. This legislation would offer states more flexibility and control of infrastructure funding by establishing a new partnership between the states and the U.S. Federal Highway Administration. And under this arrangement, states are permitted to enter into voluntary remittance agreements. You can remit 10% of your federal aid highway dollars in exchange for state purview over design, permitting, construction, all those aspects of federal aid highway projects. The state remitted money to the Federal Highway Administration would be deposited into the Highway Trust Fund, and that would help to further address its growing deficit. I think it's going to give you all more breathing room as you work to bring in projects for your states on time and on budget. Now, I understand that new solutions to long-standing, complicated problems are often met with skepticism, especially by those of you on the front lines, or in this case, on the roadsides and in the state agencies. That's good. That's good. That's what I would like to see. I want you to provide scrutiny to the Build USA Infrastructure Act. That's how I'm going to be able to make it better, although I think it's really good right now. You guys are the engineers and you're the administrators, you're the veterans from your state capitals, and you know challenges inside and out. But I am really confident in this program because we have seen it work at the state level. As a state senator, I introduced in Nebraska the Build Nebraska Act. And under the Build Nebraska Act, we diverted 1/4 cent of sales tax to a new funding, a new trust fund in Nebraska for building and maintenance of our roads and highways. So because of that, in the next 17 years, we're going to have $1 billion more dollars available to meet Nebraska's infrastructure needs. I also introduced legislation in the state for the federal funds purchase program, which is what I now am trying to do at the federal level. So in Nebraska, in exchange for giving up a portion of your federal money that you receive, Nebraska's cities and counties, they're able to do that and really deal with more reasonable requirements. It's going to move those programs through faster. We're seeing that happen in the state of Nebraska. We're seeing bridge replacement take place faster. We're seeing arterials built faster. Projects are up and running. This is what states are for, to show good examples of new ideas that work. We're supposed to be the incubators in the states, and we've done that in the state of Nebraska. It can transfer here to the federal level. The program we have in Nebraska, I think, keeps with many traditions that we have in our state as well. We want to be autonomous from federal government making transportation decisions for us. And this decision goes back generations. In the early 1920s, for example, Nebraska actually turned down federal highway dollars because it would have required a match of 50-50. And it would have required the state of Nebraska to raise property taxes by 50%. So Nebraska said no thanks. We like to determine our own destiny in our state when we make those transportation decisions. And we still want to do that. And I believe that your states want to do that as well. So investing in infrastructure, to me it means much more than just adding a bunch of new lines to a map. As I said earlier, it means connecting our families. It means the movement of goods. It means growing our economy. And in Nebraska's case, it means feeding a hungry world. My father joined the Nebraska Department of Roads in 1947, and it was his first job after graduating from the University of Nebraska. And like many of you, he devoted his career to a mission. You know that infrastructure investments don't happen overnight in Nebraska or any place else. And there were real challenges during my dad's time. We face a lot of those challenges today. There's questions of funding, and there's questions of political will. But for many of our states, we fight a near constant battle with weather as well. We know this on the plains and prairie. 2 years after my dad started in the Department of Roads, we had the blizzard of '49. We still talk about it. It lasted for 5 days. 80% of Nebraska's highways were impassable. And I know each of you can tell a similar story. But what wins out in the end is persistence and planning. That's how we build for the future. We can give greater economic opportunities to future generations. We can deliver food to hungry people worldwide. We can connect communities, families to families, and town to town, coast to coast. So I thank you for the mission that you do and the good work that you do every day. Thank you.